there's no doubt that all eyes will be on who's not at that wedding as well as who is at that wedding. And I suppose when I discovered last year that Harry and Meghan weren't going to be going, and the reasons behind that, it really puts into, I think, quite stark reality how isolated I think sometimes Harry and Meghan will now be in these, when these events arise where there are, great friends and royal family members invited, that it will be too awkward for them to attend.
Welcome to The Royals with Roya and Kate.
Roya Nikar of the Sunday Times.
And Kate Mancy of The Times.
So, two stories struck us this week. First, the annual Chelsea Flower Show in the leafy gardens of the grounds of the Royal Hospital, where the King and the Queen was, and where I was as well. And it was a beautiful day.
And I was in the City of London, for the launch of the Princess of Wales's report on early childhood. And sadly, the Princess was not there in person, of course, but her presence was certainly felt.
But we start in Chelsea, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and there are a great number of gardens for health charities, the Stroke Association's Garden for Recovery, which I actually loved, and others looking closely at the environment, Planet, Good Earth, etc.
And the King and Queen hopping merrily between them.
So it was nice to see Charles and Camilla out and about.
Yeah, on such a sunny day. They had good weather for it as well, didn't they, which helped.
In their green hinterland, which is where I think the King is always at his happiest.
Yeah, I think it sort of speaks to all his kind of ecological, ambitions and thoughts for the planet. But to lower the tone to a more kind of...
Let's lower the tone, Kate.
Let's lower the tone straight away.
Because
my favourite part of the engagement was Camilla saying that she'd watched the first episode of the first series of Bridgerton, the racy bodice ripper Netflix drama.
Well, we were saying last week we thought she probably watched Love Island in the way that the King didn't know who Maya Jama was. It was quite fun to hear her. I'd like her to she's got her reading room. I'd like Camilla to do a TV list.
A TV guide by Queen Camilla would be good, because she looked around the Bridgerton garden, didn't she? And she's a keen gardener, so this sort of speaks to everything that they love, they love to do in their spare time. And it's those engagements, I think, that kind of really come alive. It's a bit like when Kate and William do kind of sporty things, which they love. It's where they're kind of happiest. You see them at their most relaxed.
And you hear them. So you hear Charles and Camilla quite often talk, because they're quite competitive gardeners. She says they're very competitive about their fruit and veg with each other. Mm-hmm. You hear and see them going around the Chelsea Flower Show, and he will point out certain plants that he knows or he finds hard to grow, and she'll see things that she likes and she's tried to grow. And it just sort of makes it all feel a bit less formal, I think, in the way that when the late Queen used to go around Chelsea, you didn't really... She was fascinated, but you didn't hear her talking about how she would sort of stick her gardening gloves on and, root out her petunias. Whereas with these two, the King and Queen, you do.
Well, we had the Madge-mobile. Do you remember that? When the Queen made her final trip to Chelsea Flower Show.
Yeah.
Scooted around. She had a palace chauffeur sort of driving her around in the kind of Majesty-mobile, so she could still see it, because she went to nearly every Chelsea Flower Show of her reign, which is quite extraordinary, really. Shows how much she loved it.
She did love a plant. We know that Charles loves a plant and loves talking to them.
And whenever you see him plant a tree as well, he always kind of shakes its hand. So he grabs the trunk and gives it a little shake and wishes it well.
He says it's to wish it luck.
Yeah.
I know. I liked the bit as well where, of course, naturally for, maximum publicity for Highgrove and the Highgrove shop, there were the King and Queen suddenly making an appearance at the Highgrove stand. And I liked that bit where she was presented with these two wicker basket interpretations of her two rescue Jack Russells, Beth and Bluebell. And you could hear her saying, I know just the spot for them. And Charles sort of looked around at, the things that, he knows what's in the Highgrove shop because he lives at Highgrove. But there is a new...
He plugging his own merch.
He was
Chelsea,
he was giving his royal, I suppose, approval to the merch at Highgrove. But hot off the press, Kate.
Go on.
There are some bottle wars going on in the royal households.
Oh, yes.
Because I currently at home have a bottle of Buckingham Palace gin, which I bought when I went to go and look at one of the Royal Collection summer openings a couple of years ago. And I haven't finished it yet, it's still there. But Charles, the King, has produced a very small batch of pink rhubarb gin.
Nice.
At Highgrove, because there's only apparently a very small patch of rhubarb at Highgrove, and it's only produced 300 bottles. I have I've got my little mitts on one of these bottles, and so I think it's going to take some
taste
serious
test
investigative journalism by you and I.
I'm happy to take part.
to find out which bottle is best.
Well, the late Queen loved a Dubonnet and gin, didn't she?
Did. Royal
Gin
Gin Wars.
I like a tonic, gin and tonic.
Come on over and
Let's do it.
Let's do some proper hardcore journalism to find out which tastes best.
Happy to.
Okay, good.
Sounds brilliant. And I noticed that also in attendance with the royal party at Chelsea was the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, and other friends and relatives, including Queen Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopez, and Camilla's sister, Annabelle Elliot.
So a bit of a family affair.
Indeed.
Of course, this has been a week when those who are friendly with the royal family have themselves been caught up in the family drama a little bit, in particular the rift with the brothers, William and Harry.
And you seem to be the source of some key news on the subject, Roya, of who is going to attend and not attend the wedding of one of the country's richest men, the Duke of Westminster, and he's due to marry Olivia Henson in what promises to be a rather grand and lovely ceremony at Chester Cathedral next month.
Well, yes. So last week, I did a story that William was going to be an usher at Hugh Grosvenor's wedding. Now, Hugh Grosvenor, the Duke of Westminster, is one of those very rare creatures where he's an incredibly close friend of both William and Harry, and despite the rift of the brothers, has sort of maintained very strong links with both. And in December, I broke the story that we knew he was getting married to Olivia Henson. He had decided that it would be too tricky to have Harry and Meghan at the wedding, as well as William, and at that point... Orcs. And so they weren't going to be on the guest list. And that was a very big deal at the time, because I also revealed in that story that Hugh is godfather to both Prince George and Prince Archie. So he's that close to the both of them. He's the only friend of theirs to be godparent to two of their children. So I think, for it then to emerge that William is an usher and he'll be supporting Hugh, but Harry and Meghan won't be there. Hugh is very low-key, the Duke of Westminster. He's he's not a fan of publicity. He wants to keep this wedding, low-key and private. But
they have put out a press notice in there.
They have.
Well, I suppose they're acknowledging that there'll be some sort of press interest come what may.
But I think there's no doubt that all eyes will be on who's not at that wedding as well as who is at that wedding. And I suppose when I discovered last year that Harry and Meghan weren't going to be going, and the reasons behind that, it really puts into, I think, quite stark reality how isolated I think sometimes Harry and Meghan will now be in these, when these events arise where there are, great friends and royal family members invited, that it will be too awkward for them to attend.
But if you have to pick sides as well, you're going to go with the future king, presumably. It promises to be a pretty good bash. I mean, he's got about 10 billion fortune, hasn't he?
Yes.
Old Hugh.
I think the entertainment will be good. When he had his 21st birthday party in 2012, it was quite good entertainment. It was a bit more than a sort of magician and squeezy balloons. He had Rizzle Kicks.
Nice.
And Michael McIntyre, the comedian.
Okay. So William will be there as an usher, but, of course, Princess of Wales, not likely to attend.
No.
She's still recovering.
Not likely to attend because she's still obviously receiving her cancer treatment. And, so I think William will probably be the only member of the royal family there. The king's not expected to go either, even though he's godfather to the Duke of Westminster, because it's the day after he and William and the Queen will be in France for the D-Day events.
And that's a busy week, isn't it?
Very busy week. Yeah.
The wedding is the kind of the bookend of that week.
Yeah, so I think William will be flying solo without Kate. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, across London, Kate...
Well, indeed, there was reference to her this week, even though we know that she's no longer... Well, she's not doing public duties at the moment, because this week... A report produced by the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales on behalf of the Business Task Force for Early Childhood, that's a mouthful, jinx, making very clear recommendations of the provision of education and support for the under-5s to bring economic benefits to Britain. A task force that included staff from Iceland, the frozen food shop, Lego, the building blocks, Aviva, finance, the Co-op, lots of things, IKEA, building furniture, and Deloitte, the money people. And the report is called Prioritising Early Childhood for a Happier, Healthier Society, produced, as I said, by this childhood centre. And Kate has said before how much she believes positive protective factors in the early years can play a critical role in shaping our futures too. And she wasn't there. They said that she was excited to be part of the project.
She's read the report.
She was a driving force, they said, behind it. And she's read the report. She's been briefed on its contents. So she is involved, but the palace were very keen to point out repeatedly, this does not mean that she's returned to public duty. She's not yet back at work. But nevertheless, I thought it was a really interesting time to do it because we all showed up to the press briefing. You know, you never really know what you're going to expect. We knew there was this report that was going to come out. So it was interesting to hear a bit about that kind of background. They're saying it's not a health update about the princess, but the work that she's been doing that she set up last year is really interesting, I think, because it's £45.5 billion that this report says they hope the UK can save or, you know, recoup by helping under 5, so 0 to 5-year-olds. And as a parent of little kids, I think it's really important that she's doing this work. I mean, some people think it's quite worthy. It's got a nebulous kind of estimated figures. But actually, when you drill down, there's been some really kind of serious kind of financial analysis that's been done. Because the royals see this all the time, don't they? Last year I was with Kate when she went to a prison in Surrey and looked at what happens when things go wrong in early childhood. You know, these are people who end up in prison.
Those are consequences, long-term consequences.
Drug addiction, mental health problems, life of crime. And it must be so frustrating, I always think, for the royal family. They go around and they see these problems in society and they think, how do we stop it? And rather than at the tail end, obviously helping people at that tail end with mental health problems, people rehabilitating themselves after prison or after having a terrible time in life, how do you stop that happening in the first place? So this project, I think, is really crucial. And I know I'm quite cynical about a lot of these kind of projects.
Cynical, Kate. I won't have it said.
I am, but I think this one is really important because it's helping kids right at the start of their lives, and also the people, you know, like Muggins here, who care for them. And, you know, if it's hard for me as a working parent with a decent job, a supportive partner, what is it like for people who don't have that? And that's what this is looking at. And I think good on her.
Very
I think
important
it's
work.
Really important work.
And also, I feel with the Princess of Wales that she's been very clear about making this a big part of her manifesto in terms of her public work. In the way that, you know, William, I think, would like to be defined by his work in terms of homewards, in terms of earthshot and mental health. This is her kind of, you know, her passion project. It's what she wants to, you know, become known for, established in. I've spoken to lots of experts who've worked with her who are like, she's more knowledgeable than some sort of leading people in the sector because she's read so much around it. She's spoken to so many people about it. She digs in under the surface. And so when she comes back from her treatment and you know, comes back into public duties, I'm sure that this will be a very public part of, and focal part of her work. And, you know, I hear what you're saying about some people have gone, well, what does it actually mean? It's all a bit nebulous. But actually, I think for her, she sees it as a very long-term project too. And
it was described as her life's work, wasn't it, by an aide?
But she sees it, it's her climate change. It's her climate change equivalent, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think it's brilliant because it stops. It's the kind of, if you imagine, someone explained it to me like, you know, if you're taking a train from Scotland to London and it stops at every station, it's how can you stop? How can you halt someone's life from going down the wrong path, you know, at those station stops to try to rehabilitate somebody or help somebody along the way so they don't get to that end position. And of course, it's a huge cost to society for people who've had, you know, disrupted childhoods, essentially.
So important work.
Yeah. So I think we're actually very positive about that one.
Yes, good. No cynicism at all.
No. For once.
Kate, I want to go back to your thought about what the role is of the royals in the life of the country, away from the big events and the set showpieces. So I was looking at some of the appointments in the royal calendar this week, and here we go. Drum roll. The Princess Royal will visit Norway. The Duke of Gloucester will visit the Young Men's Christian Association in Newcastle.
Good on him.
The Duchess of Edinburgh will visit Capability Scotland. The Princess Royal will visit the Hornet Services Sailing Club on the occasion of its 60th anniversary. And she'll open the Army Offshore Sailing Centre in Gosport, Hampshire. A lot of sailing. The Duke of Gloucester, as patron of the Gilbert and Sullivan Society, will attend the Gilbert and Sullivan Society convention at Grimm's Dyke Hotel. I'm sure it's not as grim as it sounds, at Old Reading in Harrow Weald. And then he'll be opening the dental facility at the University of Suffolk. and then he'll visit the Suffolk County Show in Trinity Park, Ipswich. The firm never sleeps.
So the ribbon cutting continues, in a way.
So much ribbon cutting. And I think it's very interesting to kind of look at how integral the bread and butter ribbon cutting, the bread and butter ribbon cutting plaque unveiling is to the institution and actually what the public expects of them. Because William has very famously let it be known that he doesn't see himself as he doesn't want to be a ribbon cutter. But the public, they're all for, I think, the new initiatives and, homelessness and mental health and early years. But they also want to see our royal family, who the public pay for, do a certain amount of ribbon cutting. I think it's the bread and butter.
And I think Charles knows that, because when they had the patronage review, he took on 300 new patronages, knowing that
for a lot of ribbon cutting.
Well, for most of them, he's just going to be a kind of letterhead, isn't he? But it helps the charity draw in money. And I think they know that that's what they have to do. And although I know William likes to do the kind of impactful stuff, do different projects and work in a different way, he has been opening quite a few things recently. I mean, I was in Birmingham and he was opening this new kind of youth centre thing. So I think there is this acknowledgement still within the firm that they can't move too fast away from that, because, like you say, that's what the public expect. But are there enough members of the royal family to go around? Because at yesterday's garden party with William, obviously the Princess of Wales was not there, but we saw a big turnout from those non-working members of the royal family.
All the cousins.
Bolstering, William as he hosted that garden party. A lot of people from his charities there. It was raining, it was miserable, but we had Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, we had Zara,
Mike
Tyndall,
Peter Phillips
there.
I mean, it was...
Did he have a +1 though? Because that's what we're all talking about as well, isn't it? Well, who's his latest girlfriend?
It was interesting, wasn't it? And it's not the first time we've seen Eugenie and Beatrice at garden parties supporting other members of the royal family. They've been there before, they've done that before. But I thought it was quite interesting, because there's been quite a lot of discussion with, when the king was out of action, with the Princess of Wales not doing public duties. Now the king is back, and he's back roaring. There was a lot of discussion about whether other minor royals who are not officially on the payroll, they don't receive sovereign grant funding, whether they should be, brought out to fill in. And I think I've always thought that I'm not sure there is public appetite to see more minor royals, non-working members of the royal family, back on the payroll. Now, yesterday was different, because it was just, William's cousins there to support him and help him out and sort of spread the load and go around and talk to people and look very jolly. But I wonder whether that's a sort of litmus test by the palace to see what the public reaction is. And would we then start seeing Beatrice and Eugenie back on the sovereign grant, on the sovereign grant list to receive, money to go off and do official engagements? And I suppose for me, looking at yesterday, if you were in California and you had been told very clearly at the Sandringham Summit that there was no half-in, half-out arrangement for you, and you're either in the royal family as working or you're out, might you look at that and think, one rule for them, another one for us?
Well, I think so. I think I've always thought that Princess Beatrice in particular is a really good ambassador for both the family and the country, actually. And I've met her and I think she's smart. I think she's really switched on. I think she's often got a bad press that is not deserved. And I think there definitely is a role for her. I don't know Eugenie quite so well, but I think definitely for Beatrice there could definitely be some sort of role in which she could have a kind of half-in, half-out arrangement. I don't think that would have to be funded necessarily. We know the Duke of York, her father, does get money from the King's private funds to help fund his lifestyle. So, surely some of that will be helpful to her. And then if he's not working, so if Beatrice can pay back or Eugenie can pay back in some way, that's helpful as well. We know that Eugenie is still in touch with Harry. She appeared in that Netflix programme. And it's interesting to see because they are thin on the ground. That brilliant list that you read out is great. It shows you what's been done by the royal family around the country and shows you what the royals are for, which is what we mentioned at the top of the show, that they are the glue, and that link between kind of society, government, history, everything that sort of makes us British in a way. But all the people on the list getting much older.
Yeah.
And the future's looking pretty thin because George is only 10. And that next generation still have quite a few years until they can take part or will take part in those official duties.
So do you think we will start to see more of the Tyndalls, more of Bitch and usually Peter Phillips? Do you think we'll start to see them at official engagements more?
Just say it again.
Peter Phillips.
I'm not sure. It depends if he's going to, promote his milk products in China or whatever.
Now, Kate,
this is the problem.
This is niche. Not everyone will know what you're referring to.
Okay,
so remind our listeners what you're referring to in terms of Chinese milk and Peter Phillips.
Peter Phillips. Peter Phillips got in a bit of hot bother.
Hot milk.
A few years ago because he took some money to promote Chinese advertising campaign to promote milk to Chinese people.
And he was very much branded as the Queen's grandson, wasn't he?
Branded as the Queen's grandson.
And that was very key to why Harry and Meghan weren't able to seal the deal that they wanted in terms of being commercial, but also being officially royal.
So exactly. So how does that work with Zara and Mike, who obviously earn their own money?
Lots of sponsorship contracts.
Indeed.
That's the conundrum. That's the question.
And
I'm
then
posing.
if they're seen at the garden parties with William or in some sort of official capacity, it's more tricky and doesn't seem fair to Harry, who was told, no, you can't do that.
Well, will we hear some complaints from further afield? Or I'd be really interested to know what the public think about it. So if you've got any thoughts, let us know.
Indeed.
Do you want to see more of Beatrice, more of Eugenie, more of Peter Phillips?
Speaking of the younger royals and George, Charlotte and Louis kind of coming up the ranks, it does seem like William is referencing them more on jobs now. So at the garden party, he talked about George being a potential future pilot.
Helicopters or planes?
Didn't specify. He said he was a potential pilot in the making, and he would love to visit this flight base that he was talking to somebody about. And he was handed a book by somebody from one of William's homelessness charities. And he said, I'll read that to Louis at bedtime.
Interesting.
Which I thought was interesting because obviously William was introduced to the whole concept of homelessness and charities which help prevent homelessness by his late mother, Princess Diana. And he's really, really keen to kind of instill that in his own children.
Yes. When we did the interview last year with William, he talked about, I asked him about exactly what you've just said. You were introduced to homelessness by your mother. You were taken to Centrepoint in the Passage as very young children, him and Harry. And I said, he talked in the past publicly about speaking to Charlotte and Louis and George about homelessness. When they saw homeless people on the street, they would ask, what's that? And he would explain. And I sort of said, how are you thinking about introducing them to it on a more sort of involved way? Are you taking them along to secret, private visits yet? And he said, not yet, but I am thinking really carefully about when is the right time to do that. And he said, when they're a little bit more established, and it was before they moved to the new school, that's the time when I want to start doing that. And he said they will very much be involved in the work. And that was a big headline for us, actually. So it's very interesting to hear you say, that he'll read a book about homelessness to Louis, who's very young still.
Yeah.
But it's clear it's very important to him that generational thing that passed down from Diana to him, which is so important, he passes down to his own children, and they had that interest. And I think for him, he feels, as he's always said, my mother was keen to show me a life outside the palace walls.
Yeah.
Take me to the homelessness charities.
He's doing the same thing.
He's doing the same thing with his children.
I wonder if it's conscious, though, that a lot of the engagements we see him on now, he is quite confident when it comes to talking about his children, whereas there was this element for a long time that was quite private.
Fiercely protected.
Occasionally he'd say something like, Louis likes eating fairy cakes or something, and everyone would go, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. But now it seems every time he's out, he does reference that. I wonder if it's a conscious, with this kind of slimmed down monarchy, when you're drafting in non-working cousins to help bolster up kind of public engagements.
Wanting
I wonder
to make
if
the public feel a bit closer to them.
Yeah, and also this idea that, as the Queen did so well, this idea that, it's not just me, there is a chain, there is a kind of, generation after generation trying to present this idea of this sort of stability stretching forwards and backwards.
Which has always been done so successfully most of the time visually with, those set piece portraits that we used to have of, the late Queen Charles, William, Georgie mixing in the tuppence and the Christmas pudding.
Yes.
But now I think maybe William feels there's another way of doing it. And he's still, we still have those, big set piece portraits sometimes, but there's a way of doing it just in conversation and in passing comments to members of the public, which get picked up by us in our coverage.
Yeah.
And it brings the public closer to the idea of what's coming next.
This is the idea that it is the royal family, right? That we, people can see that and relate to it.
The ship sails on.
That, we'll putting their own children to bed, and, it speaks to what Kate was doing as well about, early childhood, reading to children. They're on brand, those two, aren't they? Prince and Princess of Wales. They're on message.
They are on their own message.